Good evening. My name is Meesha Blair, and I am with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI. NAMI is dedicated to improving the lives of anyone affected by mental illness. And we have joined with the Real Solutions Coalition and BASE tonight to bring this nonpartisan forum to you. The Real Solutions Coalition is an off-branch of Rogue Action Center, and they pursue a holistic approach to law enforcement and the criminal justice system by looking for real solutions to issues such as poverty, ethnic disparity, and the lack of affordable housing and quality mental health and substance use treatments. Our third host this evening, BASE, Black Alliance for Social Empowerment, is committed to supporting the advancement and excellence of Black people in Southern Oregon by fostering an inclusive environment where each person feels connected and empowered to thrive. We remind you that this is a nonpartisan forum meant to discuss many issues in our community. All candidates for these elected positions were invited, but not all of them could attend. We are grateful to have such a great turnout, and we thank the participants for their dedication to the public. The forum is being live streamed on Facebook. You can share it now if you wish, and it also will be recorded for later viewing. We have 9 candidates and limited time. Therefore, each candidate will have 30 seconds to introduce themselves, and then they will have 2.5 minutes for their answers to each question. We do have a timekeeper to ensure we stay on schedule. NAMI So, the Real Solutions Coalition, and BASE all urge you to vote. If you need to register to vote or update your registration, please go to OregonVotes.org before the deadline of October 13th. I will now pass the mic to our esteemed moderators, Mandy Yeahpau and Vance B. Mandy, Vance, thank you for agreeing to moderate this evening. Take it away.
Thank you. Vance, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself real quick and pass it back to me?
Sure. My name is Vance B. As mentioned earlier, I'll be the co-moderator for today's event. I am the founder and director of BASE, which is an acronym for Black Alliance and Social Empowerment. As mentioned, we are a nonprofit community organization dedicated to the empowerment of Black people and inclusivity of Southern Oregon. The ultimate goal of BASE, again, is to have an inclusive Southern Oregon where all groups are represented in the community, ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to thrive. I'm very thankful for being here today, and I wish you all best of luck. Mandy?
Thanks so much, Vance, for co-moderating with me. I'm Mandy Yeahpau. I'm a Native activist and lifelong Southern Oregon resident. I'm part of the Truth and Conciliation Council of Ashland, which is a citizen-organized and operated advocacy organization seeking to create equity in our community. And before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we are all living on the traditional lands of the Takelma and the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Indians. Now, candidates, you have 30 seconds, as I mentioned, to briefly introduce yourselves. We'll start with Pam Marsh, if we could, and if you could introduce yourself and then pass it to the next candidate and going onward till everyone's done their introductions. Go ahead, Pam.
Thank you, Mandy, and thank you everyone who's out in the audience who's watching tonight, as well as to my fellow candidates. My name is Pam Marsh. I am a candidate for House District 5 and in the Oregon House of Representatives. I was first elected to this position 4 years ago, so I am now running for my 3rd term. Before that, I spent 4 years on the Ashland City Council. My background professionally is in the owner of a small business. My family and I have owned a business up in the Green Springs since 1994, and I have worked in nonprofits, including most recently as manager of the Ashland Emergency Food Bank. I'm very proud of some of the legislation that I've been a part of over the last 4 years, including investments in our K-12 schools, in the 0 to 5-year-old really important early education system, in our juvenile justice system. I think we've done some reforms there that were really pretty extraordinary, in housing, and in other arenas. And I am running to continue that work and to address the issues in front of us that have emerged this year, including COVID and now wildfires.
And who would you like to go next, Pam?
Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to call
Okay.
somebody out. Okay, I'm going to call out Kevin. He's next to me in the Hollywood Square window.
There you go.
Thanks. So my name's Kevin Stine. I was born in Medford and lived here till I was 11. Then I was in the Navy. I lived in Oklahoma, then I was in the Navy. Then I came back in 2013 and got on the council. And the big things for me, and why I'm very excited to be here, is talking about solutions. A lot of people talk about rhetoric. I love talking about like the problems we have and actually trying to work on them. So just a couple quick things about me. I worked at Access, where I worked to house homeless veterans. So I have a great understanding of the service providers, and I wish we could do even more for them. But on the council, I've done things like I got Hope Village. I led the charge on Hope Village. Our urban campground. Some things are more benign like Uber and Lyft, but for me, being in public office is not just showing up when it's time for elections. It's what are you doing when you're not on the ballot? And for me, more so than the other candidates that are running for mayor, it's the fact that I actually have real accomplishments that I'm proud of. So with that, I will turn it over to Dave Dotterrer.
Dave Dotterrer, I'm a candidate for county commissioner. I'm a native Oregonian, grew up in Eugene, spent just shy of 30 years in the Marine Corps as an infantry officer, retired as a colonel, and ended up back in Ashland because my wife grew up in Ashland. She's one of the few people who can say she actually spent her childhood there. I've been very active. In fact, I had the privilege of serving with Pam for several years on the Ashland Planning Commission together. And I'm the chairman of the board of Logos Charter School, which is the largest non-virtual charter school in Oregon, over 1,000 students. And I'm also past chair of the Rogue Valley Community Organizations Accident and Disaster, of which Kevin Access is a very, very active member of that, a great member of that. And so that's my background. And I will choose, well, Terry.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Terry Martin, and I am a candidate for Jackson County Commissioner. I have lived in Jackson County for 50 years, and in that time period, I was a reporter for the Mail Tribune for about 14 of those years, where I covered city and county government, as well as was a feature writer. Before leaving, I won a National Writing Award and was nominated for a Pulitzer. From there, I went to teaching at SOU for the last 25 years and produced a whole generation of journalists that are out there in the world. But my day job was actually being part of my family business, which is DNS Harley Davidson, which up until about 3 weeks ago stood on the highway in Phoenix, and we lost the building during the wildfire here about 3 weeks ago. So I'm delighted to be here tonight, and I thank NAMI Real Solutions and BASE for hosting this tonight. And with that, I'll pick Alberto.
Thank you, Terry. I'm Alberto Enriquez. I'm running for House District 6, Medford. I am very concerned about climate change, affordable housing, living wages, and healthcare. I have a plaque over here on my wall from Obama for the work I did lobbying for the Affordable Care Act, traveling twice to Washington and twice to Salem, and engaging in numerous activities to promote real information about healthcare at a time when it was being viciously demonized. And now 30% of Medford relies upon the Oregon Health Plan. So it's been a great thing for Medford, not only in terms of coverage, but also for the tremendous amount of expansion of our regional health facilities, which impacts on mental health and physical health. I want to say that I won't walk out. There have been repeated walkouts at the legislature, and I'll get the job done. We have to do something on climate change. Denial is not an option, and now it's come for homes, it's come for lives, and it's here. It's not something in the future. We have to deal with it. And while Oregon is going to look different, that's the hard truth. In the future, Oregon is not going to look like the Oregon I had when I was a kid as a Boy Scout. But the good news is that there's a lot we can do by promoting solar power and other transitions to a carbon-free economy. We can do it by 2035. I said that near the beginning of my campaign. A week later, Biden started to say that. Then just last week, the governor of California said we could do it by 2035. So I think it's doable. Thank you.
Who are you going to pass it to?
How about Julie?
Thank you. Yeah, I was starting to feel like, remember in school when you call on teams at recess, I was starting to go, oh no, am I going to get picked last? Thanks everybody. So Julie Akins, I was an investigative reporter forever, 30 years. I was a newsroom manager in affiliated newsrooms across the country, and in recent years have been, I suppose, a volunteer and an activist. I served with the Truth and Conciliation Council. In fact, I was a founding member of that to promote equity in the wake of what we see as just continuing lack of equity in this country, especially as it pertains to violence against Black, Indigenous people of color. I worked in the queer rights realm for Lotus Rising Project, trying to help young people, especially those people who were unhoused as a result of their orientation and status. I founded a nonprofit where we convert school buses into fully functioning little homes for people. And our goal is to build a lot of them, especially right now as transitional or even permanent housing for those people interested after the fire. So we're working really hard on that. And I serve on your Ashland City Council currently as a council member. I've been there for about 2 years. And I really think that this conversation around equity is really important because it underpins everything we do as a country and as people living in this country and people living in our local communities. We talk about justice for all. Do we have justice for all yet? I would say no, we don't. And so I think this is a really important conversation to talk about how each of us in our own way is working toward that and hoping to achieve it. And I appreciate being here.
Thank you, Julie. Who do you want to pass it to?
Sorry. Let's see. How about, well, I'll pass it to my colleague, Tonya.
Thank you, Julie. So I'm Tonya Graham, and I'm running for Ashland Mayor. I've been on the council for the last 2 years and have been in Ashland. Actually, Ashland's been my home for about 24 years now, and it's where I've raised my children. This particular issue is very important to me for a couple of reasons. The work of social equity and racial justice, because I'm part of a multiracial family, and I have seen how members of my family, what happens to them as they interact in the world that is different. I have used my own privilege to shield them in certain places, and in my work, I'm the executive director of the GEOS Institute, and I work to help communities build climate resilience. And what we find in every community we work in is that those who are already struggling are far more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And so if we're talking about resilience, and we are certainly in Ashland, that resilience is the name of the game for our future, social resilience is a big part of that. And that means making sure that we have an equitable community. And so I'm very much appreciating being here today and being part of the conversation. And I thank the hosts. And I will pass it along to Clay.
All right, thank you kindly. Thank you, Mandy and Vance, for the opportunity to participate in this. It's something that I'm passionate about and care deeply about. My name is Clay. Clay Bearnson. I grew up here in Medford. I've lived here since 1985. I'm a downtown business owner. I've been on the council. This is my sixth year. and I'm running for mayor just because I believe we need to change our leadership in our community. I am not a big fan of the two-party system. I believe it has fundamentally failed us. And a lot of the societal issues that we're dealing with as a council, there's a direct nexus between the decisions made in Salem and DC and the amount of resources available to deal with what it is that we have to deal with, including mental health, drug addiction. It seems that all of these issues have become part of the polarity in our government, and I don't believe it's sustainable. It's a sustainable model to keep just arguing about the issues. If it comes from one side, then it's not well received by the other side. If it comes from the other side, then it's not well received by the other side. And I think that it's ripping our country apart. And I think that a lot of issues that should be nonpartisan are nonpartisan, like climate change or gun reform or drug addiction and mental health. And so I have yet to see any elected officials really create that nexus. Most elected officials I see are just arguing about what is coming from the other side and just echo chambers from each side. And I don't think that it's sustainable, and I think it's dangerous. And I think, you add social media on top of that and you start getting events like what happened in Kenosha and down here in our Hawthorne Park with people thinking that there was just some disinformation out there in social media, and people took it and ran with it. So I think that Medford is on the precipice of becoming a major urban area in Oregon. And I think that our demographic is changing. And I think that if we want to move forward in a responsible, inclusive manner, then we need to change the leadership first. Thank you.
Thank you, Clay, and everybody who went through that. It's kind of fun when we can call on each other. I don't know. Welcome so much. And like I say, thanks again for being here. Let's go ahead and get started. First are going to be the candidates for Oregon House of Representatives, Pam for House District 5 and Alberto Enriquez for House District 6. Kim, we were thinking would be here, but she's not, so that's okay. I'm going to ask the question, and Pam, if you could answer first and then go ahead and answer next, Alberto. The first question is, according to a report by Mental Health America, Oregon has the highest prevalence of mental illness and the lowest rates of access to care. What do you think are the best approaches to dealing with the substance abuse and mental health crisis in Oregon? Go ahead, Pam.
Thank you. I think it is very true, and Alberto spoke to this in his initial comments, that we have done pretty well in the state on physical health. OHP, we expanded during the Obama administration when we had a chance to. And we have additional coverage under the Affordable Care Act. And it is also true that we are still abysmal in mental health and addiction services, ranking at or near the bottom of the 50 states in access to services. I think there are multiple things that we need to do. I think that starts, I'll just run through all the different categories where I think we need to respond. First, I think we need to have a better shelter system. Very often people who are struggling with addiction or mental health wind up on the streets, and we need to have a shelter system that actually supports them, provides case management, and enables them to get to some level of stability in their lives. We need to have mental health and addiction systems that allow immediate access. When an individual has decided that he or she wants to seek treatment, they need to be able to walk in and get it right at that moment. Being put on a wait list and called back much later, you've lost that moment of opportunity, and it's just a system that doesn't work. So immediate access. We need to divert people from the criminal justice system whenever possible. How many of us have heard or experienced that awful moment when a family member is forced to call the cops because a member of their family who is suffering from a mental breakdown is threatening violence or otherwise engaging in some kinds of uncontrollable behavior? That's a terrible situation to put a family in. There are some alternatives, but they're not good enough. We need to have different ways to divert people so that we don't have to call the cops when someone is suffering. We need to have a criminal justice system that is sensitive to individuals who do fall into it, because it is also true that no matter how much we try to divert people, at some point, it's likely that they're in the criminal justice system. I think we've done a good job with that. And with the alternative court system in Jackson County, we were among the first to have a community family court, an adult drug court. We have an aid and assist court. We need to make sure there's treatment as part of the local criminal justice system. So we have to have a criminal justice system that is trauma informed and responsive. And then frankly, we have to have better wraparound services. That core treatment is essential, but we need to have housing, we need to have case management. We need to be able to address individuals who are suffering from addiction or mental health in the.
That's time. Thanks, Pam.
Enrique, go ahead. Sorry, Pam.
Alberto, actually.
I'm sorry, Alberto Enriquez.
Okay, I totally concur with all of that. But first, let me say one of the most horrific trainings I've gone through as a candidate came from NAMI. And it's something that absolutely must stop right away, is confining the mentally ill for a month at a time in solitary, which is considered torture by other advanced nations. And it's still going on today in Oregon. And after a few days in solitary, many people hallucinate. It's not a normal human environment. And how can we subject people who are mentally ill that we're trying to help? It's just beyond me. It's got to stop. That'll be a priority for me once I get in. There was a phrase that came, I'm going to paraphrase a line that came out of Vietnam about a village that a general said we had to, unfortunately, had to destroy it to save it. We don't want to ruin lives in order to save them. And that's what happens when we criminalize someone and we give them a felony, and then it sets up all sorts of consequences, no matter how they recover. Fortunately, we are making strides in that direction. And again, it's because of the Affordable Care Act that Columbia Care and Jackson Care Connect now, these arms of the Oregon Health Plan, are looking at creating the various stages of housing that are needed that Pam was talking about. That could be developed through, well, there's not much incentive for profit developers to do it, but there are nonprofit development agencies, not just the Housing Authority, that take an interest in these projects. And so the immediate
30 seconds.
housing, the transitional housing, and then ongoing for people that need it. I'm sorry, am I done here? I could say more.
You have 19 seconds.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Alberto. Here's the next question. Pam, you can go first, and then Alberto again. That's okay. The proposed Justice and Policing Act of 2020 would make it easier for the federal government to successfully prosecute police misconduct cases, end racial profiling, and end qualified immunity for law enforcement. What can we do at the state level to address these issues?
Well, I think we are engaged deeply in this discussion. Certainly, the deep introspection that we've been involved in, both nationally on the state level and within our own communities, that was really engendered by the death of George Floyd, and all the protests that followed, have really punched us into looking at our law enforcement system and making sure that we understand the equity implications of what we allow within that law enforcement system. At the state level, the People of Color Caucus really have led that discussion, and we've had 2 special sessions this summer. In both cases, the People of Color Caucus brought forward legislation addressing law enforcement reforms that was embraced by the legislature. Quite frankly, I don't think that we've gone far enough on that. When you have a vote that everybody supports, or almost everybody supports, then you're probably not pushing the system hard enough. However, I am very confident that my colleagues will continue to delve into this. There is the governor has a racial justice effort working at the governor's level to put together a host of legislation that can be considered in 2021. We have a legislative body led by my colleague, Representative Janelle Bynum, And they're delving in. They're looking at those issues on a statewide level. And frankly, we probably need to do that because the federal government right now has not consistently been our friend. They're not very dependable for action. And more, we've needed over the last 4 years to really depend on state action ourselves. So I think we need to take on the issues that you outlined, and we need to look at how the state can engage directly without sitting around and waiting for the feds to come forward.
I would agree that there's more we can do. Right now, we're one of the few states that doesn't polygraph police applicants. And you're giving this person the power to detain people, the power to decide when deadly force is used. You want a very stable, capable person whose psychological profile is suited to that. California does this routinely. Washington state does it routinely. And what they found is that on these disclosures from people who are trying to become police officers, they found hundreds, thousands of things that just would automatically disqualify you, but you can't get to them any other way because previous departments won't tell you. There's systematic cover-ups in some cases, and in other cases, people just don't want to risk being sued if they're a small department. For whatever reason, you just can't get at what's in this person's background. Very good thing that the legislature agreed to do was to make officers' disciplinary records public if they're fired for cause. And wow, yeah. Before, those guys could just go to the next town and get hired there, and that didn't work out. So I'm for better training, and that includes training on implicit bias, and this hinges on something that Pam just said. The president just issued an executive order that specifically forbids any training on implicit bias, which is crazy. But he seems to feel that
30 seconds.
Yeah. Okay. And public boards with minority representation to consistently review police policy and actual actions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Next question. Pam, you can go ahead and take it first if that's okay. We'll just keep doing the same order if that works for you all.
Sure.
Affordable housing is a critical support in helping those in crisis find stability and preventing recidivism for criminal offenders. The rental vacancy rate in the Rogue Valley was hovering around 1% before the Alameda fire, which destroyed thousands of homes. What are your plans to help restore affordable housing?
Well, if you had asked me this question back in March, I would have pointed to really 4 pillars of this work in Salem that I've been proud to support. The first is rental rate increases caps. We passed a significant piece of legislation that, while some advocates believe didn't go far enough, did put into place some eviction protections as well as rent caps, annual rent caps for rental units. So that was one step to protect tenants and make the rental world more stable for those, the 40% of us who are renters. The second thing we've done over the past 4 years is invest a lot of money, bond money, into the development of new housing and to the preservation of existing affordable housing that's otherwise will go onto the market. So building new affordable housing is the second pillar. The third pillar has been addressing land use. We passed in 2019 House Bill 2001. I was a big supporter of that. And what that bill actually does is to state that single family zones in communities must allow duplexes, triplexes, and quads. So we are piercing those single family zones to ensure that they can be more inclusive, more diverse, and that they can really be home to people who otherwise wouldn't be part of those single family neighborhoods. So I think that increasing density through land use is another huge important thing. The fourth thing we've started to do in the legislature is really invest in homelessness. In the short session of this year, we had a bill authored by Speaker Katina Kotek that would have invested $45 million in homelessness, including $2 million for a navigation center in Medford. This was really the first time that the state has stepped up anything near that kind of investment. Our homelessness line item in past years has really been around 4 million. So we are increasing by 10 times what we proposed to put in. Unfortunately, the walkout meant that we were not able to finish that work, but we will come back to it. So that's what we did till March. Then we had COVID, then we had wildfires. Our community has lost 2,500 housing units as a result. Now we face a much different experience than we did back in March. It's particularly painful because those 2,500 housing units were our naturally occurring affordable housing. They were largely manufactured homes and RVs, privately held, but providing modest homes. Thank you, and affordable homes to people. So we've got to be very intentional in rebuilding affordable housing. I'm working with the manufactured housing sector to try to figure out how we can bring some of those parks back, but in ways that really support tenants through tenant-owned parks or nonprofit-owned parks. The challenge is huge, and we are going to have to be intentional. We're going to have to get all the public money that we can. We are going to have to leverage, and we're going to have to be very clear on what the outcome must be, which is a community that supports all individuals.
And we need to act quickly to house people right now so that they don't leave. We need those workers. We need those families. Our school districts would be hollowed out. Phoenix Talent, 80% of the students in Phoenix are now homeless, 50% in Talent. Rogue Valley Sewer Services has moved to allow people to either hook up to the sewer service or actually put in what amounts to a septic tank that can be emptied so they can have an RV, because that's the quickest way to get in there. To put in even the solution of mobile home parks is like 2 years away. So it's going to be a very tough row to hoe, but we clearly need, frankly, a new president who will smile on a state regardless of its political orientation and send us some help, big help. I'm not an economist, but I'm guessing that the total bill for this in the end is going to be somewhere on the order of $1 billion, not just for housing. Businesses have been destroyed, the major cleanup. We need subsidies both from the state and the Fed to rebuild. But long range, I think that mobile parks are not the ultimate solution. I really like the idea of ownership. And I think that the quickest way you get to ownership in a sustainable way is to go up, to build multi-story, mixed use, mixed income condominiums. And that sounds like a mouthful, but people reside in there, they build equity. If you're in a rental, you're just giving away your rent month after month and you never build equity. And in fact, when you move away, we've all been through this. You go out of state, you lose your cleaning deposit. It's too much of a hassle to go after it, but do that every 5 years and it's an impact. So mixed use, multi-story, mixed income condos in the long haul.
Okay, thank you very much for that. One final question, and I'm going to mix it up this time and go ahead and let Alberto answer first, please, and Pam last. This last question is, what steps will you take to make the community accepting and inclusive to Black, Indigenous, and other people of color? And please identify specific issues and action items. Go ahead, Alberto.
I like the work of the cultural fair that we have in Medford every year to bring people together to talk, to promote. For a while, we had a principal who had knocked celebration of Martin Luther King out of one of our high schools. It was crazy, but I think we need to have specific educational goals around diversity. And we need on all levels to listen to our community. Not all the solutions, not all the ideas are in Salem at any time. We need to always keep coming back, and Pam has done a great job of this. In fact, I've gone to her public meetings because didn't feel I was getting heard here in Medford, and I want to do the same for Medford. I want to be the candidate who represents all of Medford. So I will do that when I'm at home.
So I think it's on to me. From my point of view as a member of the legislature, what is very clear to me is that when we convene in the 2021 session, that we need to set equity as the filter for every decision that we make, whether it's a policy decision or a budget decision. I mean, this difficult and really important and way overdue introspection that we've all experienced over the past several months has really forced us to confront what I think probably everybody on this call agrees has been 400 years of racial injustice. It's time to start addressing that. And we do that by being extremely intentional in every decision that we make to understand what the equity implications are. Fortunately, I think I have colleagues who will align around that, and I look forward to really figuring out how that works in not only in law enforcement decisions, but frankly in every decision area that's in front of the legislature, whether it's housing or education or law enforcement or anything else. We've got to approach those decisions very consciously, seeking equity out of the results. I sit on the governor's Racial Justice Committee for Housing, which is a terrific assignment. We've just had one meeting. We're getting engaged in the work, and it's really about addressing housing, again, with that racial justice filter. I'm on the subcommittee around homelessness and look forward to that work and would love to talk more with any individuals in our community who are interested in what's going on there. It is really, you know, our big equity issue in this community right now is frankly the rebuilding of talent in Phoenix. We have displaced a huge part of our Latino community. We know that those manufactured homes were a place where many families live. Talent Phoenix School District is now reporting that nearly 500 families were displaced out of their population. Many of those are part of our Latino population. So we have to rebuild these communities in ways that welcome those individuals and those families to come back if they've had to leave temporarily and to feel comfortable in our communities. And frankly, that really requires that we put their voices at the head of the decision-making about what that looks like. I've been concerned because I've heard we are all jumping to try to figure out what to do for time or 30 seconds.
If you want to wrap it up, that'd be great.
Okay. We've all been jumping to try to find solutions for talent in Phoenix. And if we don't have the voices of the people really engaged in helping us to understand how to rebuild that community in a way that feels comfortable, that has the kind of housing that will work for their families, that enables them to recreate the sub-communities that really held people whole, then we will have failed. So I consider that our biggest equity challenge and going to engage in it consciously and passionately.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Pam and Alberto. Now I'm going to hand it over to Vance Beach for the next panel of candidates running for County Commissioner.
Yes, thank you, Mandy. Hello, everyone. We will be transitioning now to the County Commissioners. with candidates Dave Dotterrer and Terry Martin. Process will work the same. You have 2.5 minutes to answer each question. You'll hear Sarah pop in and say you got 30 seconds. After that 30 seconds, you'll just be muted. So no surprise. We'll try to alternate the candidates and who speaks first. And I'll let you know, same question will go to each person. First question going to Dave Dotterrer. Last spring, county officials unsuccessfully attempted to pass a ballot measure to levy nearly $1 billion over a 23-year period to build a significantly bigger jail. What do you think the answer is to the jail issue, and how do we balance funding for preventative programs versus incarceration?
Okay, first off, I'm not sure I agree with you about the $1 billion budget bill there and everything and what the cost of that was. But at any rate, I will tell you that I voted against that particular proposal. I didn't think it was well thought out, and I didn't think that it was going to lead to any solutions. But it is also very, very clear to me, after talking with law enforcement in the area and also the social services organizations like United Way and Addictions Recovery and the homeless groups and community justice, and then talking with judges, as that we look at this and we work on the nexus between all of those pieces that we have. And we actually have quite a few good pieces, but going back to this, it is also very clear that that the jail needs to be expanded in some way, just because of capacity is where we are right now, unfortunately. And it's also partially because the population increases, but it also needs to provide all those services, and it needs to be better integrated in with all the other social services organizations. So the idea for me is that, yes, we need to have a new updated facility or take the facility we've got and upgrade it. I don't think we can spend our time and say we're not going to do it, and we're going to do this as if it's an either or situation. It's not an either or situation. It's an all of the above situation. Law enforcement and social services are intimately wrapped together, and that's very clear after talking with the social service organizations in dealing again with mental health and homelessness and substance abuse. So my proposal would be, look, it's time to just step back, take a look at what other organizations have done, and ask ourselves the bigger question of how do we provide this nexus between those different, not competing, and that's the wrong word. They're not competing for resources. We're all trying to solve the same issue and address the same issue, but there are different pieces to it that need to be taken care of, and that's what we need to do in this case.
Thank you. Terry, same question.
Thanks. I understand that the sheriff and law enforcement feels they've outgrown the current building. I understand the population increase and the desire, I guess, to have more space. What concerns me is that in other communities across the country right now, they are actually closing jails because they're thinking creatively and coming up with better solutions. My question, as I think of as a reporter sometimes when I look through these things, is who are the people they want to build those cells for? And why are they being taken and to the jail to be incarcerated? I think a lot of crimes, of course, are symptoms of much deeper social issues, of course, homelessness, poverty, substance abuse. If, for example, if you lock someone up for stealing, and they're stealing because of a drug problem, you can lock them up and hope that that's going to solve the problem. But when the real problem is substance abuse, you need to get to that first. And that's the deeper issue. And I do think that we need to start thinking about these crimes completely differently and look at the source of them and be coming up with better solutions and better programs. The original proposal for the jail was for a building, but not for services. And so that's why I think so many people in Jackson County, 70% turned it down. Plus it was a huge increase in taxes. It would have increased taxes about 40%, which was going to be especially hard on people who are living on limited incomes And then you look at now the 2,500 people that lost their homes and those of us that lost our businesses and livelihoods to either the fires or to COVID. It was just almost impossible to fund that facility. So we need to be more creative in what we're thinking. We need to find better programs, and we need to look more at the source of those crimes and look at ways to deal with people's problems without incarceration.
Well, thank you so much. Okay, next question, Terrie, we'll start with you. In terms of restorative justice, a system of criminal justice which focuses on the rehabilitation of offenders through reconciliation with victims and the community at large, what are your thoughts about restorative justice, and how do you think it could be incorporated into our adult criminal justice system?
Okay, a friend of mine is actually the nurse for the juvenile facility, and I've had some long talks with her about the restorative justice program at that facility. It involves Resolve, of course, as well as VIA, which is the Victim Advocate Accountability Program. It is, from what I understand there, it does amazing things to keep these kids accountable. They hear from the people who they did harm to, and they're given the ability to listen to the harm that was done and to try and what would take to make that person whole. It does an amazing thing for most kids, but the one thing that they keep telling me over and over again is that you have to be willing to do the work. You have to be open to looking at the program and open to hearing the damage that you might have done to the victim. So that same success that happens with kids would also have to be applied to adults if they are open to wanting to know what they've done and what they've done to hurt society and to hurt the victims, and to sit and listen to this. It can be incredibly successful, but they have to want to. It's kind of like NA and AA programs. You can take them in there and make them listen, but if they're not ready to do the work, it's not going to be as effective. So it's going to be up to the people that are working with the people in the jail and the other people within the criminal justice system to offer that opportunity, and then to judge how effective it's going to be with each person. But I think everyone should be given the ability, because I think sometimes just hearing the damage that you've done can be an amazing first step toward recovery and wholeness.
Thank you. Dave Dotterrer, same question.
Yeah, my discussions with community justice and other folks that have led me to believe, just like Terrie said, restorative justice is worked quite well with youth. And it was pointed out to me that one of the reasons it works quite well with the youth is they don't really have a longer history. Many of the adults have got quite a history of criminal activity and those kinds of things. Whereas the children, you know, they're pretty, this may be the first time that they've done something wrong. And if you catch them at that point, it really is quite good. I also got a lot of skepticism from folks about whether or not restorative justice is going to be that transferable to the adult population. So it appears to me that the solution would be, well, go ahead and on a case-by-case basis, it could possibly work, but you absolutely need to have other programs backing that up that we've already talked about, which is and for example, the plans that have been put together by the county for looking at the jail and all the community justice and everything, all of those were meant to be wraparound, and they were meant to be interconnected. One of the most fascinating things I did was to sit down with the community justice folks, and they actually went up to a whiteboard and they showed me all the constituent pieces of what Jackson County has in place, and it's quite impressive. And then they showed me the arrows and showing how they're all interconnected. But there was very clear when you looked at that picture that there were some weak spots that were causing problems. Not the least of which was often an individual ends up in jail, and they're just released almost immediately because there's no room at the jail, not giving you time enough for the social services to link up with these people. And so you put them in jail for a crime. You don't have them there long enough you just release them back out into the community, and they go right back out again and commit another crime because they have a substance abuse problem and they've got to pay for it.
30
And
seconds.
so I think that's an issue that we really need to work on that one. And I think that to me, that's where the focus ought to be. Keep restorative justice where it is, but we really need to expand those programs.
Okay. All right, Dave Dotterrer, this question 3 will be pointed to you first. Black, Indigenous, and Latinx people across the nation face disproportionate use of force by police. Here in the Rogue Valley, Tony Sancho, a Latinx actor at OSF, is currently suing the Jackson County Sheriff's Office for excessive use of force. Officers allegedly kneeled on his back, causing him to black out, and handcuffed him to the floor for 2 hours. What are your plans to address increased accountability in law enforcement?
Well, first off, we need to realize one thing about the Jackson County Sheriff and the Sheriff's Office. That Sheriff's Office is independently elected, and the county commissioners do not have policy don't have policy. They don't establish policies for the county sheriff. Their oversight is in the form of a budget. That's where you actually have your most linkage. And so it's very clear. Let's go back to what Pam was talking about. So just to step back from this for a second and just ask yourself the question, how do you provide for oversight and for accountability? And I believe that has to come from an independent oversight organization and I think it needs to come from the state level, and it does. We already have a certain amount of that represents all parts of the community, and you need to hold these folks accountable, and you need to have the investigations. You need to look into them. Now we have pieces of that. We don't do as much as we do. I'm not going to comment on that particular issue because there's a lot of pieces to that I don't know about right now, and so I think it's important that we have that as accountability councils and all to take care of those kinds of things.
Terry, same question.
Okay, first of all, I think the first step is to admit that there is systemic racism in the Valley, and that it affects all of us who live here, including people who carry badges. I think we had a meeting with some law enforcement leaders here a few months ago where they did not quite acknowledge that was something that was existent in our Valley or within their forces. And I think that we need to recognize that is something we really need to work on and acknowledge. Second of all, I think we need community-based accountability. The Board of Commissioners does have oversight over the jail. Maybe not over the sheriff, but over the jail. So there is some oversight there that can be done, and I do think that the best way, you can use civil lawsuits and you can use criminal prosecutions, but really the best way to get the best relationship with this and to get it started and to get it changed is community-based accountability. And that means that we need to have civilian oversight whenever possible into actions. We need to have independent groups that would oversee. We need to have transparency so we can get to public records on police actions as well as peer review of those actions. We need to probably pass a lot of legislation, which would go to Pam and to hopefully Alberto next year, and that would allow, for example, victim advocate statements to be used, body cam footage with protocols and when they can be used, the public's right to records in terms of police actions of any kind. And also the fact that police should provide name and badge and perhaps a card that says, here's who to call if this doesn't go the way you want it to go, whenever they are approaching anyone. I tend to think that we have a large problem in this valley that we're not even seeing. It's kind of the tip of the iceberg with what happened with Tony Sancho in the jail. And I think that if we had a different way of first responding to people in these situations, a lot of these bad results would not be happening.
Thank you. Thank you. Terry, this question comes back to you. First, communities across the country have seen success in using mobile crisis intervention teams based on the CAHOOTS program in Eugene. These programs divert mental health and substance abuse crisis calls away from the police and dispatch non-law enforcement crisis worker teams instead. There is a good deal of public support for creating a similar program in the Rogue Valley. If elected, will you support funding for such a program?
Absolutely. I've been helping with the Real Solutions Coalition here for a few months and sitting in on some of their meetings. I truly believe in bringing the CAHOOTS style type of first response down to the Rogue Valley. I do not think it should be under the jurisdiction of the county, however, only because we've watched the county defund libraries, historical societies. I mean, when they've decided that they don't necessarily like a service that's out there, they have the ability to pull that money from the budget. So I think that the CAHOOTS style program should be brought here, and it should be underneath the jurisdiction, or I guess the administration of a nonprofit, something like La Clinica, that already has the infrastructure for grants, as well as providing medical service to the community. It's crucial that we have something like this. I just say that I have a young woman in my family that had some severe mental health problems. And as Pam said earlier, it is the hardest thing you will ever do to pick up that phone and call the police, because this person has reached a point where you no longer can help them. So we really severely need this type of a service to be able to call, so that more people can have a better resource and a better option for helping people in our community.
Thank you. Dave, same question?
Yeah, I would support such a program such as that also. My concern would be that at the same time that we not divert money away from to pay for this program. And I really do believe, and I agree with Pam, having worked with Dennis Richardson on the budget up there, I was absolutely shocked at how little money the state of Oregon invests in mental health services compared to lots of other things. I was also very much surprised talking with the folks at Addictions and Mental Health Services up there, how little more money it would have actually taken moving around. But what I would be concerned about is that I just don't want this to take away from that nexus that I talked about between law enforcement, the judiciary, the social services, because that's a huge part of this, and we can't give that away either. And I've said this in the past year, it's an all of the above kind of solution. It's not an either or.
Thank you. Dave, coming right back to you with this last question. What steps will you take to make the community accepting and inclusive to Black, Indigenous, and other people of color? Please identify specific issues and action items.
Very interesting question, and a very, very difficult one. First off, I've got to fall back a little bit on my own experiences as a Marine. I came into the Marine Corps right after Vietnam, at the very end of Vietnam, when we had huge, huge racial problems. And I watched the military services, my own service in particular, obviously. I was a junior officer at the time. And I watched us struggle with these whole issues about how do we become inclusive? How do we pull together as a team and work together? And I watched over the last couple of decades, the U.S. military become a model for the rest of society of how we can be inclusive, of how we can work together. And it's a little difficult to pick up those lessons learned out of that situation, because obviously it's a different society, it's a different group of people. But I will tell you, the number one thing that you have to do is you have to just sit down with folks who feel like they're not being included and say, okay, talk to me a little bit about what's happening and how we become inclusive. What are those issues? And you'll find this all the time. People will think they're doing the right thing, and they're not, because because it rubs them other folks the wrong way. And that's actually how we went through this. And we worked our way through it by specifically really emphasizing, you know, how much part of this community we are, and a community that is a true community treats everybody equitably and equally. And most people respond to that. We also found out that there were people who didn't. Now, obviously, we had bigger hammers than we do in society, but those are really important ways of getting through that.
Thank you. Terrie?
Many years ago, I wrote a story called Invisible People for the Mail Tribune. And it was my feeling that at that time that there was a huge population of Hispanic people in the Valley who we did not see, that we did not recognize, that we never heard from. I went out and spent probably a week alongside the people working in the orchards. I went to where they lived. I talked to their children. I watched their children take them to the post office to be able to translate for their parents. And that was so many years ago that you think things would be different now, but they're not. This many years later, we still do not see these people, and yet Hispanic people, Latinx people make up almost 14% of the population of Jackson County. If you add all other people of color, I think it adds up to, I think, around 16 to 17%, which means you should be able to see these people everywhere you go. There should be 1 in 10 people out there that you see that are people of color as you walk down the streets of Jackson County and you don't see them. So I believe that we're going to have to, number one, acknowledge they're there. And number two, we're going to have to go find them, and we're going to have to go talk to them, because we're not going to be able to hold meetings and hope they show up. We're not going to be able to ask them to serve on boards and committees, because it will be the same people within that population that are the leaders that are going to have to serve on everything. It's going to be up to us. The Board of Commissioners, the people, the elected officials, the people with nonprofit agencies, to go out into the community, sit down with these people and talk to them about what they need, what we can do to make this valley more inclusive to them. I don't think I have the answers to that, because it needs to come from them. And we need to have more conversations with them at all levels. I know in the school system here, both of my kids went through the Phoenix Talent school system. They would come back with stories of kids that were living in houses with, 12, 13 people in them, 6 kids per room. And those things are happening that we just don't ever hear. We wouldn't know if my own children would come back and tell me. So we need to acknowledge the fact that they're here and begin getting out of our comfortable homes, our offices, our board meetings, and get out there and find these people, talk to them, and specifically include them in everything we do, and use that, as Pam said, as a filter for everything we do, to make sure that we include them as we make every decision.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both, Dave and Terrie. That ends our county commissioner forum. I will now pass it over to my co-moderator, Mandy.
Thank you. All right, so this next panel is going to be for the mayoral candidates for Medford. That will be Clay Bearnson and Kevin Stine. I'm going to go ahead and start you off with the first question. I'll go ahead and alternate candidates this time. So maybe Clay, if you want to take this answer first, and then Kevin, you can after that. The first question is, racism occurs when one group has a disproportionate share of wealth and power over another group, and then uses those resources to marginalize, exploit, exclude, and subordinate the weaker group. Racism does not just happen at the individual level. It also manifests in our institutions, including education, healthcare, and criminal justice systems. So given that, how do you intend to address institutional racism in our community? Go ahead, Clay.
All right, well, thank you for the opportunity here. I have some notes that I have prepared here. I think when it comes to—
a little bit louder, if you could.
Okay, actually, let me put on some headphones here. I think that we need to, we need to address inherent biases, whether they're intentional or not, in our law enforcement and You know, I think that the inequities span, you know, across, you know, a wide array of people. And I think that it is also a part of what it is that is broken in our government, in that, you know, these things become political footballs, and it just keeps getting kicked back and forth, and no solutions have come out of it. And, you know, just because, the Equal Rights Act was passed, it doesn't mean that racism went away. It just went underground. And I think that this past year has really shown that it hasn't gone away at all. And I think that if we want to get to the bottom of it, then we really need to have those uncomfortable conversations. And it just seems that our leadership is not willing to have those uncomfortable conversations. It seems that, it just kind of gets put on the back burner or something. I'm not really sure. I think that on the local level, we can advocate for, inclusion in our community. We can advocate, we can try to make a community that's inviting to people regardless of their ethnicity or socioeconomic status. And as a city, that's something we can do. I think that, I don't know. I think that we should encourage, implementation of whistleblower policies. If somebody says something, sees something, say something, I think that they should be protected. I think that we should, let it be known to all the people in our community, regardless of what their background is, that they can feel safe by calling the police. Even if they don't speak English. And I think that, when it comes to the MPD, I think they've done a great job as far as like reaching out to our Latino community and being inclusive in some of the public outreach. I know Lilia Caballero has done an excellent job. And I believe that they've done the Citizens Police Academy in Espanol and invited our Latino community to participate in there. So I think that, on the local level, we should just try to be more inclusive, and our policies should reflect that. And maybe even some of our employment practices at the city of Medford should be more diverse, and they should reflect, the diversity that we have in our community.
Kevin, same question.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm a substitute teacher, and so I go through all the different schools in Medford, and you really see the diversity there, especially in schools like Jackson, where about half the 40% or so of first graders identify as Latino or Hispanic, and so obviously about 1 in 5 people identify as Hispanic or Latino in Medford. But somehow when you look at people in power, whether that be in upper level management throughout the businesses in our community, or you even look at the city of Medford, or you look at our police and fire, you don't see that. Is there efforts? Maybe, but when you don't have representation, people don't feel included. And when you don't have representation and voices, things get left out. I mean, I only know what it's like to be me. My wife is Mexican. She brings things to me that maybe I don't understand because I don't have that lived experience. So it is so important as a city, as a government, that we are reaching out, that we are getting those voices to the table. One of the big things that we're going to be doing over the next year is building a long-range plan for a whole host of issues for the city of Medford, working with all these different community partners. But it only works. All these plans, any plans, only works if you actually have multiple voices, that instead of just the same people that for many, many years come and say what, generally people look like me, come and say their piece on a matter. But we really need to do that outreach, and it's not easy. We all know it's not easy to get some of those underrepresented voices to the table, but it needs to happen. It must happen for us to be able to be the type of Medford we need to be. Because if it's just people like me with my experiences determining what Medford needs to look like in 2050, we're going to fail, and that's unacceptable.
Thank you, Clay and Kevin. Kevin, I'm going to go ahead and have you answer this next one first too, and then Clay will go. What are your plans to address increased accountability in law enforcement? What impact, if any, would those plans have on the Medford Police Department's nearly $60 million biannual budget?
So there's a couple different things here. Number one is when I got elected in 2014, before I even got sworn in, I talked to the police chief at the time, Tim George, and I asked about body cameras. And this was even a little bit before it became a huge thing nationwide. But I asked Chief George about body cameras because that was an issue that was arising. And there was so many police departments that were resistant towards having that. Luckily, you know, he was on board with it, and then a little less than 2 years later, we got it done. The reason that is important is because it's that accountability piece. As we see across this country, when you have police officers telling a story, and there's no, and it could be someone that could be underserved, a person of color telling a different story, that officer is almost always believed, hands down, no matter what, no matter how many witnesses or anything. So it's very important that for the city of Medford, we're doing our part. So when these situations occur, which I hope they don't, if they're occurring already, I hope we can do everything we can to make sure they don't happen. But if it does, that there can be that accountability piece, that we can see it, that we can see the improper practices that might have occurred. And the second part of that is, what do we do when or if that happens? And so there needs to be zero tolerance towards racial injustices in our police department, especially when it comes to, things against people of color. So that's just a small part of it. The other part, I go back to that representation piece, is that we need to have people in our police force, more people in our police force that speak Spanish, that can communicate with people of color. And it's not just for the enforcement, you're right, it should not just be, oh, I'm a police officer and every interaction is going to be something negative. It needs to be things where, you know, people of color in our police force can have dialogue with the communities that we have in Medford that are primarily people of color, and building trust. Because when, no matter what anyone's background is, if they're having an issue, they need to be able to feel safe about contacting law enforcement.
Clay, same question.
I would say that's probably a good idea that Kevin has suggested, is having more people that might speak Spanish representing them. I have always aspired to retire close to the border, y yo hablo español. So I think that the first and foremost probably thing to offer accountability will probably be not arrest reporters, because they're the conduit to the public. And if there are reporters on the scene of anything that the police are doing, then they should probably respect their press credentials and allow them to continue with their reporting. I think that the addition of body cameras was a really good thing. I think Kevin is right. You know, I've grown up in this valley and I have had adverse experiences with the police department. You know, I grew up in this valley with long hair and earrings, and I have had friends that have had adverse experience with the police department as well. And when it came down to it, it was our word against whatever the word was in that police report. So I'm excited that there are cameras available now. I would hope that they would always use them and not selectively use them. I think that, let's see, I had some other notes over here. I think when it comes to accountability, I mentioned that in an earlier answer, and I'll just reiterate it. I think that we should have a whistleblower policy that offers protection for any police employees or members of the public who witness any profiling or abuses of power committed by an officer and come forward. And unfortunately, when things happen and people say something, sometimes either no action is taken or action is taken to kind of keep that information from becoming public. So I would encourage transparency in our government, and I would encourage transparency in our police department, and you know, for the most part, I would have to say that, you know, I think we're doing an okay job, but I definitely think that there are some issues that could be dealt with.
30 seconds.
Okay. I definitely think there's some work to be done locally, but you know, at the end of the day, people don't call the police because they are having a good day.
Okay. Next question, we'll go to Clay if you want to answer this one first, please, and then Kevin. What are your plans to address the addiction and mental health crisis happening in the Rogue Valley? If elected, would you support funding a valley-wide mobile crisis intervention team that is run by mental health and emergency medical care professionals and not police, like Cahoots? Oh, Clay, you're muted there.
Sorry, technical difficulties here. I think that, you know, first of all, we should probably treat people that are mentally unstable or addicted to drugs like human beings. And, you know, I'm sure that people saw my stance on what happened recently here in a park, and it was totally contrary to treating people like human beings. And I think that if we want to deal with, you know, our issues of drug addiction and mental health in our valley, then it needs to come from a compassionate perspective, and we need to look at them like the people that they are, and we need to move forward with that. I think that it's really easy for people to say, oh, well, some people choose this lifestyle, they choose to do this, they choose to do that. I realize that there are some people that probably do choose and do deny services, what, you know, inadequate services we have available right now. And I think that if people took a minute to walk in the shoes of somebody and see where they're coming from, they don't know the lived experience, they don't know what adverse childhood experiences people went through, and why they're addicted to drugs, and you know, and why this long time of exposure has you know, destabilized their mental state. So I think it's really important for us to first of all, you know, look at them as human beings and quit treating them like subhumans. And then second of all, I think we just need to rethink the strategy overall. I would support a COODS program. Let me be the first to say that I don't think that incarceration or jail is somewhere where we should be offering recovery services, whether they're mental recovery services or drug addiction recovery services. I think that, you know, we should probably just reimagine how we plan to move forward with this. And I think it's going to take a collaboration between all of our regional partners. This Cahoots program, you know, it could be a regional asset. And if all of our neighboring jurisdictions were to commit and invest in it, then I think that it could be a regional asset to everyone. And it would also free up assets for our police department, because I don't believe that our sworn officers should be serving the role as social workers. If we can have a Cahoots program, then that will free up the time. That'll free up the time for the police department to focus their efforts on fighting crime. So I would absolutely support a Cahoots program.
Okay, Kevin, same question.
Yeah, so police officers should not be social workers, and if you want evidence of that, ask a police officer if they want to be a social worker, and they don't. They want to be a police officer, but there's a complete failing in Oregon. Oregon is 50th in mental health outcomes in this country. 50th, last. They're a nice progressive Oregon, last in mental health outcomes. That doesn't mean people like Pam Marsh are working. She's working, but we haven't got there. So with that, I like what Lane County does. I saw it for myself when I went up to Eugene last year with the Cahoots program. I have zero problem funding something like that. I think I heard Dave saying, you know, we shouldn't take away from other services. I understand that, but there should be priorities, right? As an elected official, you make priorities, and it should be a priority for the county, for the cities, not just Medford. Medford seems to provide lots of services. Where's Ashland? Where's Central Point? And putting money where their mouth is, and helping out people that are less fortunate and trying to get these things off the ground. So totally on board, because there's just not enough services, and you know, it's a statewide issue, but we need to do what we can. And so for me, as I've shown on the city council, I'm willing to support pretty much anything because what we're doing now is ineffective. It's failing. And as someone that worked at Access, literally talking to people that were houseless, you know, and many, you know, a few people there that have mental health and drug alcohol addiction, such a big part of them overcoming any of these issues is housing. And I'm very proud of my efforts with Hope Village, working with Rogue Retreat, getting Hope Village done, the urban campground, which I go to like once a week and see the progress there, and our shelter that we have in downtown Medford. I mean, Medford's putting in the work, and I really wish other communities did as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, Clay, you kind of touched on what happened in Hawthorne Park, and Kevin, you're talking about shelters and the answer to the last question. So now we're going to kind of dive into that maybe a little bit more. This one we'll have Kevin, you go ahead and go first, and Clay, you'll answer after Kevin. The question is, after the Alameda fire, fire victims included unhoused people living on the Greenway with shelters and urban campgrounds full of and having waiting lists. Some individuals took refuge in Hawthorne Park. At the direction of the city, police executed a mass eviction and arrested 11 people, including a JPR journalist, which Clay mentioned. What is your stance on the happenings at Hawthorne Park, and what other options are there for fire victims who can't get into a shelter?
So one of the things that I want to say first is we did have space available because of the efforts the city council has taken with Hope Village, with the shelter, and at the campground. So that's one, is that we did have space available. We took 31 people that volunteered, 31 people that said, yes, I will accept services. And those people were able to get shelter. They could not get shelter in Ashland or Central Point, or the county the county helped with the expo, but they didn't have services before the Alameda fire the way Medford did. So I'm proud that we have these services in the first place. For the second point, there's 11 people arrested. Zero of them were homeless people. Zero. Okay, so we did not go, this Medford police did not go and arrest homeless people. There were 9 people that were arrested for trespassing. 2 people were arrested because they had previous warrants. So with all that, you know, this was the thing where the whole council, no one on the council, Clay included, did not say a word about, hey, don't do this, right? Clay said after the word, oh, I didn't like what happened, but he didn't use his voice in the way that he's trying to do now, saying he opposed it. That's for one. 2, I mean, I support our police department. They did what they believe they had to do. You know, most of the people there, again, they weren't arrested. But you know, I saw it with myself with the drug needles and the trash and things of that nature, that it was unacceptable for it to continue in its current form, and services provided for those that chose it. Unfortunately, not everyone chose to go to a shelter. And working with the homeless community, I maybe don't disagree with it, but literally sometimes you can talk to someone that lives in a tent, offer them a service, and they say, no, I'm pretty happy living in a tent. I mean, no amount of services are gonna have affect that free will that people have.
When did you see needles down there?
So I was there on that Tuesday, right?
When they
So
did the arrest, and that's when 30 people were moved to shelters?
I'm sorry, what was your question? There was
that when 30
needles.
people were moved to shelters?
Yeah.
Okay, because I just want to get the timeline right, because we were calling the shelters and they were all full. And I know that's been the speak from the police department and everyone else, and just really want to get down to the truth of the matter. And if those people were not homeless, what were they doing in Hawthorne Park?
There's 31. I mean, you can talk to Rogue Retreat. I wouldn't agree with
that's the thing.
Making up numbers. So I'm not sure what your question is.
Well, my question is, how do you know there was space at the shelters? And how do you know those people were not homeless?
What people?
The people in the park.
The 11 people that are arrested?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the names are out there. You can look at Medford mugshots and see the 11 people that were arrested. So, I mean,
Okay.
I don't
I
know
don't know
what
where your information's coming from.
you want their specific names of who got arrested and whether their houses.
No, I'm wondering how you know they're not homeless, because I don't understand. So if they have homes, why are they camping in the park? I'm just confused by what your statement.
There's the people that got arrested, like Sam Becker and other people that were not.
Oh, I
part of it,
know,
not
volunteers.
houseless.
Yeah.
So those were the folks that were arrested.
Okay. All right. Clay, do you need me to repeat the question, or do you have it? And you're muted still.
No, I don't need to ask the question again. What is my stance on it? I made a public statement regarding my stance. For the record, Kevin did point out that I did not speak out against it, and that's because I was not in attendance of the G3 meeting at which we were briefed about what was happening there. So I was unaware it was going to happen. Last I saw, I was under the impression that it was going to be a week notice, and I was hoping that we could have found some resources available for the people that were there. I think that it's a false narrative that's being broadcasted that, you know, we're putting people in touch with services and justifying the inhumane acts by just saying, well, we put them in touch with services. Our essential safety net services for our 790, whatever it was, our last point in time count, are grossly inadequate. They're bursting at the seams. We don't have enough resources to serve our homeless population. And the only reason why there were bed spaces available, I did speak with Chad Comas and I asked him about this because last time I had heard that they were all full as well. And he had a heads up that this was going to happen. And so he told me they reserved some spaces for them. And so my question to him was, well, did you deny those services or those spaces to other people that may have been in need? And he didn't really say no, but he said, well, we did just recently expand and added 50 more spaces to that. So there was definitely some heads up on the behalf of that. Let's see. I think that what did happen in Hawthorne Park is a prime example of what we have historically been doing and to no tangible results that we can see in our community, and that is squeezing the balloon. We went in there, and the PD went in there and kicked out, you know, everybody out of the park, and then within a day or two, you know, they were out there on the greenway and squeezing them again, and it's not sustainable, and it's not a good way to spend our tax dollars. I mean, you know, the financial impacts of homelessness on a community are by far greater than what it would cost to house people, and that's what we need to rethink in our strategy. And that's all right. Thank you. That's why we need to, you know, come up with a collaborative solution that all of the people who are being impacted financially can put those resources that they have saved and put it into some sort of regional response. Because what we're doing, treating people like you know, like subhuman, is completely unacceptable. And I think that the city manager could have used his latitude that we gave him with that declaration of emergency, and he could have worked with the county and maybe found a parking lot that we could have used in the interim, at least for a small short amount of time, until we could get people housed, in touch with services or in touch with support services or families. So I think that's what should have happened, and I don't agree with what happened at all.
Thank you both for that. I appreciate that. I have one final question, and it's similar to the one we've been asking the other candidates. And in the interest of time, though, if we can just keep it kind of short, if you can. We're talking about what steps that you will make to make the community accepting and inclusive of Black and Indigenous and other people of color. But a lot of folks have talked about the Latino community, and I'm wondering if you could speak specifically to the Black and Indigenous community and be specific about action items around those folks. Let's see, Clay went last. Go ahead and have you start again, Clay.
All right, let's see here. Could you reiterate that question though? So you said not specifically, not just our Latino population, but Black and Indigenous, our portion of our population.
What steps could you make to make the community accepting? Yeah.
I think encourage policies that are going to be more inclusive. I think that, you know, when it comes to, you know, I think housing is a big issue that is having, you know, a disparate impact across, you know, Black and Latino and indigenous portion of our population. So I think that we can, you know, we can come up with policies, and when we come up with those policies, we should be looking to people who have lived experiences that should share those experiences with us, because, you know, I don't have the lived experience to know what it's like to live as a Black man in this country or in this community, nor Native Americans. So I think it's going to be really important to, you know, revamp our, you know, our multicultural commission. I know it's something that we're looking to do, and I would love to give our multicultural commission more of a recommending body authority. So, you know, we can appoint people who have lived experiences, you know, that have grown up in Black communities and Black families, or you know, indigenous families. They can share their experience, and how, and you know, we can't come up, you know, they'll have a better chance of coming up with a tangible policy recommendation that would have a better impact than, you know, somebody who doesn't have those lived experiences.
Kevin, same question.
Yeah, it's about having an open mind and an open forum as well. For me, you know, everyone, I have my cell phone number very publicly available. People can email me, but you know, it's about being open and being honest with ourselves and finding our shortfalls and working to overcome them. If we go around saying everything's fine, I mean, we're failing ourselves, and we're failing the community that we serve. So it's about just doing that out. A lot of it's about doing that outreach and working with organizations that, you know, our communities have communities of color within them, and just doing a deep dive and figuring out what it is we're doing, what it is that we can do, and then working towards that for the betterment of all.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all keeping it short because we are right on time. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Vance for the Ashland mayoral candidates. Thanks again so much. Take it away, Vance.
All right. Thank you, Mandy. All right. So we're taking it home with our Ashland mayor candidates. We have Julie Akins and Tonya Graham. Thank you so much for being patient. This first question, this will work the same way. Where I'll ask a question to the first candidate. You have 2.5 minutes, and then the following candidate will answer the same question. First question will be addressed to Tonya Graham. Last year, the Ashland Council passed Ordinance 3176, which allowed police to impose hefty fines or jail time for individuals who commit a violation and refuse to identify themselves. Community members have raised concerns that allowing police to impose such heavy sanctions is unreasonable and could be used to predominantly target the unhoused and other marginalized groups. Although the ordinance has sunset for now, it's on the council's agenda for October 20th. What is your position on this issue and why?
Thank you, Vance. So I have supported this. I supported it last year, and then it's coming up again, but I believe that the conversation that's coming up to us in October is what is the threshold at which point the police would bring it back to council. This is something that shouldn't have to be done at the local level. This is really a state issue, and the city of Ashland is responding to something that has been left unfixed at the state level. It is a very simple ordinance. It simply says that somebody has to give their name and date of birth so that they can receive a ticket for a violation. That's it. It's nothing about probable cause. It doesn't give any officers the right to stop anybody that they couldn't stop before. And it doesn't make anybody identify themselves in terms of giving over an ID. That none of that is the case. And unfortunately, it has been mislabeled in the community as a stop and ID law. And it just simply isn't that. There is no doubt that we have a problem in this country and around disproportionately targeting people of color in terms of law enforcement. There's no question that that's happening. But this particular ordinance is not about that. When somebody gets to the point where they have committed a violation, that officer has already made two choices that are very important to be addressing bias. The first one is, do I stop this person or not? We know bias has a huge part to do with that. And the second question is, am I going to give this person a warning or a ticket? And we know that bias has a lot to do with that answer. And so by the time that you've gotten to that point in the conversation where a ticket is going to be issued, the question of whether somebody should identify themselves or not is simply a function of being in civil society. We have to get after those earlier decisions and make sure that those are equitable, that those are lining up, that we are not stopping more people of color than we are proportionally white people, and that we are not ticketing more people of color proportionally than we are ticketing white people. But at the point where a violation has happened, they need to be able to identify them. If we don't have this in place, somebody can commit a violation, which you cannot take someone to jail for that. You cannot arrest somebody for committing a violation. So that means the officer walks away. That's what's available to them if the person who they're trying to give a ticket to decides not to tell them who they are. And so my hope is that the state government will actually fix this in its next session, because that's where these laws sit. The law about that you have to identify yourself in a car or outside of a car to receive a ticket, that sits appropriately at the state level. And because they have a problem with the way that the language is of the statute, that's what's creating this problem that Ashland has been stuck in the process of trying to solve. It is unfortunate that that some people, I think, in the community have labeled this what it is, because it causes unnecessary fear among people who already have good reason to be afraid of law enforcement. So that's where I sit with that. The council has set it aside and has said that if our law enforcement has significant problems with people not identifying themselves to receive a ticket, then it needs to be brought back. But the question that was sitting there is, what is that threshold? So we need to give the police chief some guidance about what is sort of too many of these incidences where police have to walk away in order to bring it back in front of the council, because it has sunsetted. That ordinance is no longer in place.
Tonya, that's time. Thank you.
Julie, same question.
Okay. Well, I don't think it's fear mongering. I think that people were aware of the ordinance and its implications and came out and called it stop and identify and did not want the ordinance, primarily Black, Indigenous, people of color, and people in the LGBTQIA community, because they fear being stopped at disproportionate levels. And in fact, they are. Black folks are stopped at roughly twice the rate of white folks in the city of Ashland. We can hearken to the Tony Sancho case, a man who was walking home after a performance at OSF, who was intoxicated and walking, not illegal, and was stopped by police and then consequently handcuffed and arrested, and is said to have been chained to a urine grate throughout the night. People are afraid of those things happening, and we don't need to actually make things more scary. I don't think talking about it makes it scary. I think the things happening make it scary. So it was labeled stop and identify because that's what it is. A police officer can stop you and demand that you identify yourself, not necessarily show ID, but give your name and date of birth. And at first blush, if you don't really dig deep into implicit bias, it sounds fair. Oh, well, how can they give you a ticket for a violation if they don't know who you are? But the problem is at the root of it. Who gets stopped more often on a violation? Is it going to be a well-heeled white tourist, or is it going to be a person of color? Is it going to be a young person? Is it going to be a homeless person for a violation? It's typically going to be someone in a marginalized population. And what happens is it takes something that's a violation, essentially a code violation, which might be a warning or a small ticket, and it turns that into a misdemeanor, which then gives you a criminal past, which then makes you have to pay a fee, which may in fact result in jail time. So it takes something minor and turns it into something major that, if you're already marginalized, can really actually wreck your life. So that's why I was against it. I remain against it. As to Ashland fixing a state loophole, I don't think that's really true. If it were true, every other city would have an ordinance like this, and they don't. This was a response to the McNally ruling, which was actually based on people's right to protest and not being arrested for protesting. So it's a workaround, and it's not a good workaround, and it shouldn't happen. I posed it then, I pose it now. If it comes up again, I'll pose it again.
Thank you, Julie. Taking something minor and making it major. Makes sense. Julie, coming back to you with the second question. An Ashland community member asked, I quote, "What will you do to ensure that people experiencing mental illness are treated by people who know how to deal with them professionally rather than fearful police who tend to be violent, which only escalates problems? The last time I tried to take my son to the ER for a mental health emergency, he was taken to jail instead," end quote. What are your plans to address the addiction and mental health crisis happening in the Rogue Valley?
Thank you for that question, and I can relate to the person who asked that question. I have a neighbor who fears very much. She lives with her mentally ill adult son and fears very much having police interference in that case, because things can go very, very wrong when you call the police and someone is acting out in a mental health way. I do favor a Kahoot style system. It's been around a long time. It's proven to be effective. I do think that when someone is having a mental health issue, it's not a policing matter. It is a social worker matter. And so I do support that. And I think we can divert some funds from our current police department in order to assist in a Cahoots model. I favor the idea of a social worker actually being embedded at the police department and going on calls that are mental health calls. And the reason I favor that is we tried a program here a few years ago where we had a social worker, but they were based at the hospital, and the police would call them out when they thought they needed them. But the police don't always know when they're going to need them. And so the person was underutilized. I think if they're embedded in the police department, they're more likely to be utilized. I also agree that we need more services for people with mental health issues and addiction issues, because that's at the root of a lot of our problems and how we are sort of fraying apart in our culture. And I think we need more beds for people. You know, I think we have hardly any at Rogue Hospital in Medford. It's not enough. I look at Asante here in Ashland and I see a hospital that's underutilized. I'm wondering to myself if there's a possibility of perhaps adding some mental health beds there and assisting. So my heart goes out to that person and every person who's been involved. I think of the case of a young man who went by the name of Redwood, who was an unhoused man I knew very well, who was on the plaza one day and had, within minutes of giving a police officer some lip, he had several officers on top of him and he was terrified. He's a person who identifies on the autism spectrum. And that was not a service to him. It took him a long time to get over it and he wound up leaving our community. We can do better than that, and we have to.
Thank you. Tonya, same question.
So the question of mental health and addictions, and of course that we know that in many places those are linked very, very strongly, is an important one because we know that it destroys families. I have some personal history with that. And then I also just simply know that everyone I know has someone in their family who is struggling from mental health or addiction issues. And so when they call for help or when their families call for help, they need to get the right help. And we've seen it. We have a great model in the Cahoots model. And in fact, that's what we're looking at in the social equity and racial justice resolution that we passed in Ashland. One of those tasks is to, in fact, work on this regional system. And that's one of the tasks that I signed up for. And so just before the Alameda fire happened, I was in a meeting with Ty O'Meara, our chief, and the folks at Jackson County Mental Health to talk about what are the options and how might the communities in our region come together with the county in order to put a process like this in place. We know that the Cahoots model has some challenges when we're working in a place that's not quite as densely populated. So our outlying communities, that structure might need to look a little bit different. But the simple fact is that some calls for help are going to be entirely mental health related and need to just simply be practitioners. Some of them are going to be entirely law enforcement, and some of them are going to be in the middle somewhere. And so we need to make sure that we have the right resources and we have the right people to respond to these very different types of calls. And so I'm working on that personally. And you know, the other thing I think we need to just think about in terms of our mental health situation is that we're dealing with a backlog. We have done such a poor job of mental health over so many years that we have a lot of adults who've have never received the services that they need. At the same time, we know that one of the very most effective things we can do is to get it early and get to children and make sure they're cared for before they develop an addiction problem, or to catch that mental illness right as it's developing. And so we need to lift both of those systems. And I think we do it by making sure we have enough beds. We also do it by making sure that we have enough assisted housing. Some people can live mostly on their own, but they need to be checked in on more frequently. And we don't have a lot of that middle ground service available. You're either sort of in a place, in an institution, or you are completely out in the world on your own in many cases. So there are a number of things that we need to put in place to meet the needs of that whole spectrum of people who we have because we have failed for so long.
Thank you, Tonya. Tonya, coming back to you with this question. Earlier this year, a U.S. judge decided that Grants Pass violated its homeless residents' 8th Amendment rights by excluding them from parks without due process and citing them for sleeping outside. What changes need to happen in Ashland for the city to comply with the new ruling?
So that ruling, the way that I understand it, the way it's been explained to me, says that you can't tell someone that they can't sleep on the streets if in fact you don't have somewhere else for them to go. And so that sheltering space is really, I think, the important piece. I'm very impressed with the work that ORA, Options for Helping Residents of Ashland, has done. In their shelter, they have wraparound services. So they have navigators helping people connect up to the services that they need. It's going to be difficult because of COVID. Over this winter, we need to figure out some alternatives for that sheltering situation. But part of what we need to do is to figure out what exactly is the capacity that we need in this system. How many people does Ashland need to be serving? And how much of this service should happen in Ashland, and how much is better suited for more regional efforts? And so we get a better handle on what does that look like for us. One of the things that very well could look like is an urban sort of campground like what we see with Hope Village. So the folks who put Hope Village together did recently a 2-part workshop that I attended that was called Urban Camping 101, I believe. And they talked about this ruling, and they talked about the steps that Medford went through to set up Hope Village, and you know, to talk to other communities that might be thinking about the same thing. But what we need to do is to come together and make a plan in Ashland that addresses a variety of these things. It's not simply shelters, but it's also transitional housing. We know we have a major housing problem in Ashland. It's gotten much worse since the Alameda fire, but it's particularly a big jump from folks who are fully homeless. To get back into housing in Ashland is incredibly expensive. And so how do we develop that transitional housing that can be a step up and help people reintegrate into Ashland so they don't have to go somewhere else? So that's where I'm looking at with that mental health, with that ruling and what it means. We need to make sure we have places where people can go.
Seconds.
Okay.
I'm finished.
Julie, same question.
Well, we've been researching this for a lot of years, and I finally, after a year of asking, had a housing meeting about homelessness here in Ashland. And I don't know that it's a discussion or trying to figure out what to do as much as it is having the will to do it. There are models out there that we can borrow. Housing First, we know this works. It costs three times as much to keep a person on the street than it does to house them. And what I mean by that is it costs 3 times as much to provide mental health services, physical health services, and everything else that it takes to track a homeless person down and help them. If they're housed, they're in one location, and it's far cheaper. And actually what we find, and I know this because I house homeless families and children, is that over time those services become less necessary because they're stabilized and they're okay. So it's really got to be a Housing First model that we use. I've been working on this for many years. I've worked with Chad McComas on this as well. And one of the things that he said that I thought was remarkable at this meeting I'm talking about is he said what Ashland really needs to do is get out of the way and let people do what they can do. What we have are zoning rules that make it very hard for people to build affordable housing. We make it very tough for people to be able to build things that are, in fact, there's a project right now that's several, I think it's like 48 units, around $850 for a unit. Still expensive if you're making minimum wage, but you might be able to pull that together if you have two people living together. It's still sitting on a shelf. We need to move affordable housing up to the top of the priority list and be able to get people in housing. We need housing first models so that homeless people, rather than being pushed from this place to this place to this place, they actually have a place where they can be. I know homeless people very well. I've had them stay with me in my little house, and they have told me that when they ask the police, okay, where can I go? They're told not here. That doesn't work. Not here doesn't work. Our own police chief has said on the record that he's told people, I will drive you to Medford to the gospel mission for you to have a place to stay. That's not an acceptable answer. The city of Ashland needs to do its part. And by the way, the gospel mission does not work. It's a programmatic thing. You have to actually be part of that program to stay there. So dropping someone in front of the gospel mission in Medford and driving away is not only ineffective, it's unkind. So we have to step up and do our part. If we have the will, we can find the answers. They're there in abundance.
Makes sense. Julie, coming back to you, what are your plans to address increased accountability in law enforcement? Second question to this is, what impact, if any, would those plans have on the Ashland Police Department's nearly $17 million biannual budget?
It's a really good question. I'm going to go back to some recent examples. I think our police department does a decent job of de-escalation on many, many occasions, but like every police agency, they're imperfect. And we've got some pretty bad examples. And I think I'm going to go back to the Tony Sancho case. I think it's not our finest moment by any stretch. This is a man who didn't need to be arrested. He needed to have a place to sit down, sober up, drink some water, and go home. He wasn't harming anybody. And they said they were taking him into custody to protect himself. And then they put handcuffs on him, and he wound up chained to a grate in the jail. It wasn't the place for him. That happened to him, I think, in part because he's a person of color. So we have to hold police accountable for these actions, and we have to make it unacceptable behavior. This happened before. Another young man was arrested and held overnight, a man of color, for a crime he didn't commit. And he didn't really even fit close to the description. Why did that happen? So we need to make sure that when those things happen, we figure out systems so they never happen again. And I think that we need an equity index. We need a commission, people of color who monitor our police department, go through the issues, report those issues to the police and also to the city council and the community so that we can actually get benchmarks and see how we're doing so that we can stop doing those things. They continue to happen if they happen as a one-off or a two-off. You have to actually measure this stuff regularly. We know that people are disproportionately stopped when they're a person of color in this town. We know that's true from our own statistics. So we have to hold people accountable and no longer have that happen. So we need a commission with teeth in it. And as mayor, I would make sure that happened.
Okay. Tonya, same question.
Great. So I think for this conversation, it's important to first discuss what has been put in place. And so the Ashland Police Department is part of the Statistical Transparency of Policing data collection effort. So at the state level, the state passed that law a couple of years ago that basically says we're going to start paying attention and tracking certain demographic characteristics of the people who are encountering law enforcement when law enforcement initiates it. So if a police officer stops somebody, if they approach them, not if they're responding to a call, but if it's an officer initiated encounter, who are they stopping? Keeping a racial and gender and age, I think are the pieces there. What happens when we stop them, and then tracking it through the court system of what happens to those different people. Because one of the things I think that is clear about in implicit bias is that people really don't think that they're doing it. It's such an unconscious and subconscious piece that people believe that they're being fair. They believe that they're treating everybody the same way. And then it turns out that they're not. And the way that you get around that is by measuring and seeing how things line up. So what does that look like each year? How many people are being stopped from these different groups? What is happening to them when they get stopped? And how does that align with how the police are treating white people, for instance, right? What does that look like? And that helps us know how far off the mark we are. And if we are significantly off the mark, then that means we have to put programs and training and those sorts of things in place to pull that number down and to get it in alignment. So that's a big part of it. The mayor also signed the 8 Can't Wait pledge, and our police chief recently went back through and reworked and revised our use of force policies locally. And so I think those are things that certainly the city council can keep monitoring, making sure that we're staying where we want to be staying. But what I would say in general is just that when we allow someone to stop somebody else, when we give them the authority of a police, we absolutely have to have accountability, no question. They are the only people in the country who can put somebody, into handcuffs and take them to jail or potentially harm them on behalf of the community. We have to be extremely serious about what that means, and we have to be to have accountability throughout that system. So I'm interested in seeing what might be done with citizens commissions, but I think structurally we need to make sure that we know what is happening to people on the ground in our community through metric testing, and also making sure that people feel comfortable telling us when they have a bad experience.
Thank you. Now going into our last question that we've asked pretty much everybody here today, what steps would you take to make the community, this is addressed to Tonya first, by the way, what steps would you take to make the community accepting and inclusive to Black, Indigenous, and other people of color? Please identify specific issues and action items. Now, before you answer, I haven't heard any specifics yet, and I've heard a lot of, we need to talk to these people. The whole nation has been screaming about inclusivity. If that is your response, then I will ask a follow-up question being, why haven't you already spoken to those communities of people?
Fair enough. So this is a little bit more difficult question. I think that's why people are having a hard time answering it, because this is about changing the hearts and minds of people. It's not policy. Policy doesn't necessarily automatically equate into people feeling more comfortable and feeling more welcome in our community. But there are some things that the city can do initially, and I've included these when I drafted the social equity and racial justice resolution for the city with Councillor Slattery. We put several things in there that were specifically around this cultural aspect. So one of those is making Juneteenth a holiday that's recognized in some fashion by the city, and working with local entities to celebrate this. Ramping up our celebration of Martin Luther King Day, and then opening up that conversation to say what else needs to be done for other groups of our community members. What other ways can we celebrate Black, Indigenous, people of color, and their different variety of cultures? So that's one piece of it. One piece of it is dealing with what the culture feels like for university students. So in Ashland, we have a good-sized university population, and their students of color tell us that they don't feel welcome down in our main part of our town. So we need to be working with the university to figure out what are they experiencing, and then how do we get out into our community and make sure that we stop that. And it's through training, it's through a variety of different programs that might be had for businesses and individuals that is really around education, and it's about partnering with those entities in the community that can help make that happen. We also, internally in the city, we have a piece in that resolution that's about our hiring practices and how we track, how diverse are we as an employer, as a major employer in this community? How are we doing in terms of making sure that we have a diverse workforce and that we have people in leadership who are coming from diverse backgrounds? We don't have any metrics about that right now, but we're working to put those and those HR policies in place. And then the last piece of this, and this, I know people who've had these experiences. A lot of what is happening to people in Ashland is coming from people who mean well and think that they're doing something that feels welcoming, and it's not. And so part of this is a training need for businesses, for organizations, for individuals that says, how should, what should I do in order to make sure that everyone I encounter feels welcomed? And to make sure that we have some way of rapid response when somebody has a negative experience in our town. Right now, there's no one that they can call. But if we can work with different anchor institutions in the city, we could create some a program that not only offers the training that different people need, but also gives somebody somewhere to call when they have a bad experience, and have that person intervene on behalf and go talk to that clerk or that store owner, or go speak to somebody that they've had a negative interaction with. So that's something very specific that I've been interested in for a long time. And my hope is that our resolution can lead to that. It's one of the pieces that's in there, but it's going to be longer in development than some of the others.
Thank you, Tonya. Julie, to close us up.
Sure. Well, I think that what happens sometimes among white folks when they're talking about Black, Indigenous, people of color and issues around it is we come off as pretty performative. We're going to do this and do that. And it sounds good to us and maybe even looks good on paper, but it doesn't actually get the job done. And I think what everybody wants is a good job. They want to be able to walk downtown and not fear being disproportionately targeted by anybody, especially the police. And they want to be able to live in a neighborhood that's affordable and safe. And Ashland needs to create that for everybody. And we're not there. We're basically seen as a little white enclave, and it's a kind of a fair rap. So if we actually want to do better, we have to be better. I worked with the Truth and Conciliation Council, and I wanted them to be the ones to draft the measures that we want in our city for people of color, by people of color. And I still support that. I appreciate all the good intentions of everybody who is trying to come up with resolutions, but I think it's important that the people themselves who are affected make those decisions and tell us what they need, and then we respond to that. And so that process is still ongoing, and I still support it. I think that we do have an issue of police disproportionately impacting people of color in our community, and it just needs to be addressed. There needs to be dialogue, but there also needs to be consequences. If you're an officer and you've made a mistake of that type, there has to be something actually done so that you don't make that mistake again. That would be true in any field in which any of us work. If we had an issue like that, we would be called to account, and it would be certain that we wouldn't do that same mistake. And we need to do that with teeth in it. We do need to look at our hiring practices and put them on on an equity index. We have to actually look at who we hire and and how that expresses to the community. Sorry, it's getting so late. How that expresses to the community our intention around equity in our community. And I also think we do need some symbols. Like the plaza was a place where Indigenous people came and met and negotiated and talked, and there's no evidence of that. If you go to the plaza, there's a little white kid with a gun. It doesn't say anything about the people who founded this community. I'd love to see that plaza showing its history. I'd love to have some memorial to that. I would love to have artwork there by our amazing Indigenous people who live in this community. So I think it needs to be a town that looks like a place that was founded by Indigenous people. It needs to be a town that responds to the true need of Black, Indigenous, people of color for true equity in our community. And we need to do that now, as soon as we can.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Tonya. And thank you to all of the candidates today. This closes down our Real Solutions Coalition Candidate Forum. I'd like to provide a couple of updates and reminders for everyone out there listening. If you need to register to vote or to update your voter registration, the deadline is October 13th. You can update your registration at OregonVotes.gov. If you were displaced by the fire, you can still vote at your home address, even if you lost your home. You just need to update your voter registration to include a mailing address where you can receive your ballot. Again, I just want to thank the Rogue Action Center, NAMI, Sarah Westover, Meesha Blair, the Truth and Conciliation Council, my co-moderator, Mandy, the BASE team, all of our candidates, the audience, and everybody that watched today. Everybody that was a part of putting this together. Thank you so much, and until next time. Bye, everyone.